I've had a strange relationship with LEGO games in my almost 21 years of life. As a kid, I very much enjoyed them. Sure, they're not my top games ever made or anything like that, but they were fun to play with friends and family members. I especially like the ones based on licensed properties like LEGO Star Wars, Pirates of the Caribbean, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Marvel Superheroes, which was my absolute favorite. Second and third place games, though, are LEGO Batman 1 and 2 for me. While I don't think the games are that great anymore, there was still something so charming about those games compared to any other licensed LEGO game. While everything else was trying to recreate scenes and stories from movies, the LEGO Batman games were very much trying their own thing. The first game's plot's a bit scattershot, but there's enough family-friendly charm mixed in with its appreciation for Batman as a franchise that kept it entertaining. While I see a lot of people these days say the original LEGO Batman is the best and better than the sequel, I would disagree. While I do think that the lack of voice acting does have a lot more charm from the perspective of humor, I vastly prefer LEGO Batman 2 for its larger scale and sheer reverence for the DC universe. This was the first Traveler's Tale LEGO game that was fully open world, and while it's not the greatest ever, for what it was trying to do at the time and all the characters it has, it was the best it could have been, as it feels so supportive of all the characters and how they locomote in the game. Despite also being the first game with voice acting, I don't think it completely took away from the charm of the first game, even if I don't think it's as good. The campaign was still pretty fun despite that though. So of course 3 has to throw it all out the window. LEGO Batman 3 was underwhelming, but you don't need me to tell you that. Remember how I mentioned that I liked 2 for its larger scale? Well, the thing about 2's scale is that it felt super focused on Gotham and widening that out. 3 promises to go to space, beyond Gotham, as stated in the title, but ultimately felt really small in scope. And that's odd because the game that took place entirely in one city on Earth feels so much less empty than the game with multiple planets to explore. Reminds me of a game. It was just a strange game to experience where I was pretty excited for the game, but then slowly became more disappointed with it. I don't care that this one had more space stuff or that they focused on the Lantern Corps, it was just miserable. The campaign itself wasn't terrible and probably the most enjoyable part of the game, but it's still so boring compared to 2. It tries so much yet delivers so little. Then when you're out of that, it feels like there's nothing to do anymore in the open world, and it's not even that fun to explore anyway. Even with that, I still played LEGO games all the way up to 2018. But with the passing of time, I just slowly started to fall out of love with LEGO games in general. Entries like LEGO Marvel Superheroes 2 were pretty disappointing to me as a kid. Then some were just kinda questionable, like LEGO The Incredibles, which was a weird movie tie-in that was supposed to bank off the hype of the second movie, while also having the most forced co-op scenarios ever, and needing Pixar characters to fill out the roster because this is not a series with a bunch of characters. The last LEGO game I even opened before 2022 was LEGO DC Supervillains, and I didn't even finish that one because I just stopped caring. By the time I totally stopped playing LEGO games, I was 13 and made more room for bigger and better things, both things for children and not for children. However, in 2019, LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga was announced, and I wasn't that hyped at first, but I thought it would at least be cool. Then more information came out and I got mildly excited before playing the game and thinking that it was pretty good, but just not great. I just had a lot of problems with it. Puzzles were further simplified, combat was just fine, but also not pushing the envelope very far. You still couldn't actually die in these games, and a whole lot of other little issues that didn't stop me from liking it, but did hinder the experience a little. So with that slight disappointment, you could feel how mildly apprehensive I was towards LEGO Batman Legacy of the Dark Knight, which I'll just call Legacy from here on out because the title is a goddamn mouthful. While there was plenty of promise, like the combat being more akin to Arkham, a scaled back character roster to focus on said combat, and a more focused LEGO Batman narrative that still took inspiration from the films with references and iconography to Batman's history, I still had the feeling they'd mess it up somehow. I definitely wishlisted the game for sure, but I didn't think I had the money or the time or even the interest to play the game. However, thanks to a friend of mine in real life, I was actually able to play the game via account share because I get busy and broke in these sad times, so thanks to him. After playing and finishing it a few days after launch, I can confidently say that I do like the game. I think this might actually be the best LEGO game from a gameplay standpoint, whether that be combat, traversal, or even puzzles. Yet I still think the game is majorly flawed despite its shocking highs. The thing is that whenever anyone brings up that this game has flaws, it's often met with hand-wavy comebacks like, it's just a kid's game, or it's not that deep, which are the parts that interest me the most in regards to this game in particular. No one ever really uses this rhetoric for other supposed kids games to lampshade any critique, but they do here for some reason. They did it for Skywalker Saga 2, but we'll use Batman discourse for today. So, what makes a game just for kids? And when does constructive criticism for it apply, or in this case, stop applying? Now before I talk about the game at all, I'll just touch on the story first. There's nothing to be said. So back when Skywalker Saga came out, it basically just retold the films in a hilariously compressed way, even for a movie to a sillier game retelling. You could really feel it in the cutscene pacing that it was just every Star Wars movie but rushed as hell. Legacy's approach is basically to just take the scenes and iconic moments from the comics, movies, animated shows, and other Batman media, and forge an original narrative with it. What you get is both something that's better than Skywalker Saga and feels more complete, but also something that's pretty random and incoherent. Not that the story is really worth saying much about, but it's just sort of scattershot. It feels like a more earnest effort of the devs and the writers, just pulling random Batman story sequences or references and just putting it in the game in some sort of way to awkwardly fit in the narrative. As said, it's very sincere and you can tell how much love and care went into it, but that doesn't keep it from being a jumbled mess of random references to Batman things. While it was kind of funny and silly to see the references to other things, it doesn't really have a plot, at all. Now, you may think it's weird that I'm critiquing a non-movie tie-in LEGO game for not having a plot, but they've had goals before. LEGO City Undercover was about taking down Rex Fury and his criminal reign. LEGO Marvel 1 was about uncovering the mystery of the cosmic bricks and all the villains trying to get to it. LEGO Batman 2 was about stopping Joker and Lex from brainwashing Gotham's population. LEGO games have had plots before, and while it's not really bad that Legacy doesn't, it does make it feel kind of aimless. I swear every chapter more or less goes the exact same way. This chapter will heavily reference and set its silly framework around this movie or show's iconography, with a few references in between while Batman has a specific partner or two for the whole chapter, until the next one where the same thing happens again. What's so confusing to me about this format is that it feels like they genuinely don't know if the story should be episodic or in some level of sequential coherence. Example, you'd think something like throwing Talia al Ghul at the end of the game would just be a logical callback to the first mission where you fought her dad together. Nope. It more or less is just something that happens because they realized Talia was still alive. It just feels like they put her at the end of the game out of obligation because she needed a final boss. And even if she was planned, it still feels random. The final mission in general pretends that it more or less has any narrative ties to the beginning of the game, but it's just sort of hackneyed in its way of doing it. Now, I do like some of the ways that the game handles transitioning into different parts of Batman's history, using the templates of the movies while doing their own thing. Like Joker getting so fucked up that he goes from Jack Nicholson Joker to becoming Heath Ledger's take. Something like that is super funny and kind of creative, an example of what the game could have been if it had a more seamless and coherent story. I may get shit for this, but I think they could have toned down the references and visual gags that pertain to other Batman media. Despite being E10+, I'm very aware that this game is sold to people like me who aren't children, but it got somewhat irritating over time. Nothing wrong with visual references here and there, or some lines from other media, but it genuinely feels like key jangling more than writing something funny or clever. Hell, I think even as jokes, they kind of fail and feel like a teenager referencing a movie with their friends, rather than funny homages to previous media. I will say that besides that, I think that the dialogue is super sincere in how cheesy and kid-friendly it is, but in the best of ways. Like the whole city and police actually calling criminals bad guys, or the sillier origin stories for different characters like Two-Face. It feels like witnessing a dad and his son playing with Legos, and how that looks in the child's imagination. Hey, wait a minute. The entire third act of this game is rough as hell, as partially mentioned earlier with Talia. Chapters 5 and 6 are super short, and it feels like the game trying to wrap itself up in a heartbeat. Not saying that the chapters should have been that long or anything, but I think a good fix to this would have been allocating time to other things, instead of the point of no return proceeding the shortest third act I've seen since Insomniac's Spider-Man 2 of all things. Again, it's a story in a LEGO game, but it felt so weird to finish the story that fast in the last 2 of 6 chapters, especially with all the Talia shit I mentioned earlier. I have very little to say about the story other than it being too incoherent and episodic for my taste, and having a really weird third act. It's a very sugary and fun game for sure, and it's probably got a better campaign if you're a dad playing this game with your kid, and vice versa. However, even compared to other past LEGO games, it feels like there's no real goal and that things just sort of happen before a key jingling reference. I could literally not tell you a lick of what this game is actually about. It's not because I can't keep up with this piece of children's media, but more so because the game doesn't really have a plot at all, and it's just a string of random events with a bunch of references that people old enough to have grown up with Batman would know, but ultimately, the story lacks some substance. I don't expect anything grand or emotional from a goddamn LEGO game, but at the very least, I expect something. I expect it to be about something. As far as charm factor, it ranks in the same space as LEGO Batman 2, but doesn't top the first one. Actually, when you think about it, the first game didn't really have a plot either, but honestly, I think the first game's lack of voice acting might have actually been a good thing in that regard. I don't know, something about characters actually having voice acting while the story, well, doesn't exist is just off. The story in Legacy isn't that special, but I'm sure someone and their little brother will probably enjoy it. I don't know. I think the second way we can dissect how people perceive this game as a kid's game, and whether it deserves criticism or not, is by tackling the combat. The combat in most LEGO games is typically pretty baby easy. Not only that, it's kind of hilariously and insultingly simple. Every TT LEGO game pre-Skywalker Saga followed this formula. When far away, you shoot something with X/square while playing as character with projectiles. Press same button to punch when up close. And then maybe use some move with B/circle button. Sometimes characters would have transformations or suit ups, but that was only with specific characters. The thing is that this formula was fine for a time, but it made every game play the same after a while. Sure, the games were good in their own right and had cool moments, even with the simple combat, but it didn't really change it from being somewhat brainless. Didn't help that enemy and situational variety was often very low too. This extends to platforming and puzzles as well, but that's a segment that I'll cover soon. Skywalker Saga more or less tried its hand at addressing the issue by making the combat a lot less of the spam square template. The problem with Skywalker Saga, however, was that it was not only still easy, but it was probably more button mashy than the other games in the franchise. Granted, I think that the combat was definitely an improvement, but it also wasn't much deeper, since you could pretty much mash anything and get the job done. What Legacy of the Dark Knight does is essentially walk it back and try to understand what type of combat would work. We can't have anything too complex because the game is rated E10+, but we also can't really do too little because, let's be totally real, the majority of people playing the games these days aren't children or teenagers at the very least. This will be important later. So what they did was to just do Arkham, but LEGO. This was probably the best choice they could have possibly made for this game, considering two things. For one, the people that played LEGO Batman 1 through 3 and even DC supervillains when they were kids are either older teens or adults now. Two, Arkham's combat, while totally hard to master, has a low enough skill floor that even young kids could get into it. I could attest to this. I played Arkham Asylum and City when I was 6 years old. Sure, I did it on easy mode, but again, I was 6 years old when City came out, and I was able to grasp how the combat worked on a surface level. While I wouldn't say Arkham is exactly button mashy or a spam counter simulator, as some of the detractors disingenuously try to label it, it's not super hard as a series either. There were moments that I struggled with as a kid, like the undisputed best boss fight in the entire series, but for the most part, I think the average person could probably play this series with few difficulties. Combat at its core was pretty simple, which was to rhythmically press square and counter, bouncing from enemy to enemy, increasing your combo count. On paper, it's pretty much a simpler style of combat than the standard hack and slash approach that Skywalker Saga tried to do, but failed to implement. There was something about Arkham that made it so special from Asylum to Arkham Knight, which was essentially everything surrounding the base mechanics. While it is easy to just press square and counter attacks, there are several variables that come into play. The biggest one that fucked me up as a kid all the time was that with each hit of your combo, the fights became so much faster. With the speed, you had to mash buttons less, actually, and be able to make split-second decisions, while still being patient enough to not hit the enemies too quickly. They even mixed it up with enemies that had riot shields that you had to cape stun and vault over, enemies with knives that you had to do a special directional dodge to evade, or enemies that were too big to tape down without cape stunning them first. You had to think about all those things while keeping your combo multiplier at a high enough rate during certain fights. While it wasn't exactly required in the campaign, if you're just trying to knock that out in a weekend, it's very encouraged when you actually try to make the most out of the combat. The thing is that it wasn't just by attacking, but also using quickfire gadgets mid-combo, or again, using different strategies on different enemies. There's so much variety, and it's at its most fully realized in Arkham Knight, despite how messy that game's campaign is in retrospect. The reason I went into so much depth about Arkham's combat is because it was pretty much a perfect combat system to simplify for a LEGO game. In theory, it's simple enough to learn and hard enough to perfect that it made sense to use for this game that's made for kids in mind, but also doesn't skimp out on trying to give the older fans something somewhat fun to do. So how does Legacy actually handle it? I'd say it does it well with a few caveats here and there. I think it's a pretty good entry point for younger kids to be able to play an Arkham game without having to worry about the major difficulties. Other than that, I think that for older audiences that aren't in grade school, it's still fairly fun for what it is. It pretty much has every Arkham mechanic, but made easier. There are obviously some gadgets and moves omitted from the game, like the remote electrical charge or the disruptor, or watered down like the explosive gel, but I think those additions probably would have overdressed the game, considering the age rating. The hand-to-hand combat works pretty well considering that it's just Arkham Light. It has pretty much everything I like from the Arkham games, like free flow and the use of quickfire gadgets within combat. Although I would say it's a lot less encouraged in comparison comparison. Hitting enemies still feels pretty good, and I'd probably put the combat above Asylum by a slight bit, mostly because Asylum has the weakest combat in the series due to it just being the first game within it and not aging all that well. But it's a testament to how good we had it with that franchise compared to recent Batman ventures that aren't very good. As stated earlier, the game is made to be like a baby Arkham of sorts, which is an exaggeration by any stretch. While you can lose your combo by whiffing a punch or getting hit, there are things in the Arkham games that would also risk your combo multiplier that doesn't really apply here. For example, if I hit a shield enemy or a brute enemy without stunning them in Arkham City tonight, my combo would immediately go down the shitter. While this is frustrating as a player, it's also a good way to remind you that you should be aware of your surroundings and what enemies are near so that you don't fuck up your combo. In Legacy, you can hit a shielded enemy mid-combo and suffer no penalty besides your combo count not increasing. Shit, you can even hit a brute enemy without stunning them just to add on to the combo. It just won't stun lock them as hard as other enemies. None of this is really that bad, hilariously enough. But I feel like mentioning this because it's proof that the game is essentially Arkham but easier. You can also take way more time to buffer yourself in between attacks during your combo compared to Arkham. So if you take it slow to some degree, you can take your sweet time to analyze your surroundings a lot more than Arkham, which had you making faster on-the-fly decisions. One thing that bothers me is how the characters kind of play the exact same in combat outside of their gadgets. Granted, this is a common occurrence that also happened in Arkham, but at least they felt a bit more varied in comparison. In here, they're just a little samey, and it's a bit more noticeable because unlike the Arkham games, you play as these guys in the open world more regularly for exploration. Plus their traversal is all the same too, but I'll get into that later. What makes it worse is all the gadgets pretty much serving the exact same purpose in combat, which makes the problem even more annoying. All the offensive gadgets do is stun the enemy and open them up for a beatdown, and that's pretty much it. I won't pretend the Arkham games gadgets did that much either, but it was fun to use them in combos. Hell, you can even use them on specific enemies because you didn't have the time to do a cape stun or something, like using the REC for example. Legacy doesn't have this, and I get that it's a LEGO game, but they already chose this combat system, so at least somewhat go way further with it, I don't know. I want to make it known that I played this game on the hardest difficulty from the jump. Not because I'm a pompous jackass or anything, but because I already knew that it would at least be somewhat easier considering the subject matter, and I was totally right. Hard mode for this game is barely even normal mode in most other games. Shit, it's barely normal mode for a children's game either. A lot of combat encounters are a total cakewalk compared to other combat-heavy games for kids. It's not quite Sonic Frontiers easy for the most part, but it gets really close at times. I think as long as you're over the age of 12, have 2 hands, 2 eyes, and a working pulse, this game's fights are so easy, whether it be standard encounters or boss fights. This is that unscripted post-editing part, but I forgot to mention that the stealth in this game kinda sucks. Like, I don't expect it to be that good considering the type of game this is, and that LEGO games typically don't really have stealth combat, but considering the inspiration, it's kinda stupid that the stealth is bad. All the enemies are kinda stupid. It's hard to really describe without a script, but there's frankly nothing to actually talk about here. And then the actual stealth stuff has like no variety. You can go to vantage points and press R1. You can walk up to them and press R1. It's just kinda boring. That's it, goodbye. One thing I'll give this game over something like Skywalker Saga, however, is that for the first time in any LEGO game, you can die. This sounds like something stupid to even point out or praise, but it's frankly a godsend because while this game is kind of too easy, even by kids game standards, it's also a good thing that you can actually get a game over this time. Granted, you have to run out of health 3 different times to get to that point, but I think that's a good enough way to partially remedy the fact that this game is lacking in difficulty. See, in other LEGO games, dying was pretty inconsequential besides losing studs, and while that was devastating, it also wasn't impactful either. I remember talking to some friends in high school about LEGO games, and I specifically said that in the next LEGO game, you should be able to die and give consequences for such beyond pushing you back a few feet. However, said friends more or less mentioned the fact that these games are for children, so they shouldn't have these, and I mentioned how that was kind of a weird way of thinking. Sure, LEGO games are for a younger audience, but every major TT game is rated E10+, meaning that if we're going strictly by age rating, you have to be 10 years or older to play these games, suitably. Not that these games are inappropriate for children of all ages or anything, because I think a lot of modern games rated E10+ are often pretty safe and would have been rated E back in the 360 era. For example, example, Epic Mickey 1 came out on the Wii in 2010 and was rated E for everybody. But the remaster didn't exactly add anything besides running at a higher resolution and frame rate and having updated textures, and is rated E10+. Literally nothing changed. But I guess by today's standards, children would probably struggle with it somehow. I mean, there's a little bit of scary imagery, I guess. Although LEGO games have been E10+ for a while, so I'm sure Legacy would have been that rating back when LEGO Star Wars 2 came out. There's also the more obvious fact that games for kids can be just as hard and sometimes harder than a lot of games for adults. Not only that, but you can die with consequences in these games. I don't mean some semi-obscure pixel platformer franchise or a series that by these days is considered relatively niche either. I'm talking about mainstream stuff like your Marios and your Sonics and your Zeldas and whatever the hell else you can think of. As much as I like some modern games, I'm willing to bet that the easiest level of Mario 3D World is harder than most M-rated over-the-shoulder games, even the ones with an emphasis on combat and challenge. Hell, I think the fact that LEGO games are E10+ does the game a disservice compared to other children's games, since those are more challenging while being E-rated. A game like Sonic Generation probably dog-walks this game in difficulty as early as Green Hill and Chemical Plant, which is funny because while in a sense the game had a combat system, it's not a combat-focused game at all. My point is that just because some piece of media is for kids, doesn't mean that the developer should hold back with the difficulty that much. I'm not saying it even has to be at the level of Champions Road or something, but for the love of God, do maybe a little bit more? I don't need it to be too punishing, especially not for the parents that just want to play this game with their kids and have a good time. But there needs to be something to just push the players towards getting better. You guys have to understand this one simple fact about the game. They chose the combat system from the T-rated game series that started in 2009, with one M-rated entry in 2015. Whether it's a kid's game or not is immediately diminished the second you realize its inspiration and the real target audience. So ultimately, for what it is, the combat is pretty fun for baby's first Arkham, all things considered. Outside of being too easy on the hardest difficulty, it's at least fun, which is better than being super easy and really boring. In writing this, I've neglected to talk about the actual open world and collectathon part of this game. Frankly, that's because the original plan for this video was that I was going to get the platinum trophy for the game, but if I can be honest with myself, I was a bit overwhelmed by the amount of collectibles and activities. This isn't really as much of a problem with the game as much as it is my capacity to put up with this while also playing other games and doing other shit. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't a hindrance, so I decided against going for the platinum. However, I still think I can say a lot about the open world and the visuals for the game. For one, I think Gotham City looks the best it's ever been. In other LEGO games, while they do a good job at making characters and vehicles and environmental objects look like LEGO, I still never really fully felt immersed. This is more of a nitpick, but it always confused me as a kid as to how un-LEGO-like a lot of environments were in the open world LEGO games specifically. Starting with Skywalker Saga to my knowledge, I like how recent LEGO games have used current technology to make the worlds look a little bit more like LEGO. Besides just making it look like a 3D model of a LEGO just got transported into a random pseudo-realistic city, they also made the effort to make almost everything look like it came from a child's imagination. Legacy continues this trend and does it even better. It's not just about making things look realistic per se, but more so about the sheer attention to detail making Gotham look like a Legos. I like how the figures look exactly like they do in real life when they get wet from rain, for example. The true-to-life minifigure details on the cloth of Batman's cape is really cool to see. I just like how everything, again, looks and feels like a Lego set, which extends to the open world itself. Gotham's buildings are tall scaled to the entire cast, but they're also just as blocky as an actual Lego building. Maybe I just have a shitty recollection, but it's so much better than a lot of old Lego games which took place in a city where the buildings look very well detailed, but also out of place compared to the characters. Maybe you can interpret that as the game's feeling like a kid playing with their Legos in random places, or more likely the devs just not having the resources or time to make it look more blocky. Outside the visuals, there is a lot of side content in the game, which personally I wasn't really into. Like saving animals by stealth or investigating certain crimes was fine, but they weren't really that fun to me personally. I think the incentives are pretty good, which give you more suits and vehicles to play around with, but frankly after doing quite a bit of the side content, I got a little fatigued. But then again, that might just be a personal thing. I do like the suit selection that I personally got, but weirdly unlike other superhero games, I kind of paid little mind to it in comparison. Same for the vehicles, but again, maybe it's just a me thing and not a problem with the game. One thing I'll mention is Absolute Batman just being a skin and not a big fig because there aren't many playable big figs in the game due to how weird that would be to program for this combat system, but I suppose that's just a nitpick. The traversal system in this game is really weird to me. I don't hate it, and I think it's fine, and it's probably the best LEGO traversal in the entire franchise. kind of, but it really is just Arkham's grappling and gliding further stripped down. It wasn't complex in those games either, but it felt weighty, but still pretty fast. While in Legacy, it feels a bit more automated and kind of sluggish. It's not a terrible way to move, but you could honestly just scroll on your phone while gliding to objectives. It's a real shame because this is one of the few things you could not look me in the eye and tell me this game is for kids with a straight face. There are so many different games for children with forms of movement that are so quick and efficient and smooth without resorting to just pure automation, or at the very least they reduce automation. Some of the most popular family-friendly franchises have been known for doing this. The design philosophy may be inherently different, but the idea of smooth movement in a game aimed at kids isn't lost. I think the open world stuff in general just gets little out of me personally. I don't hate any of it, and there's lots of fun to be had, but the amount of checklist activities was overwhelming for me. I just couldn't do it all, and maybe that's okay. Maybe someday I'll come back and clean up everything and then get the platinum trophy, but as for now, there are other things to do. Speaking of other things to do, we have puzzles in this game. The puzzles are similar in difficulty to the combat in my humble opinion. Listen, I think when people mention the puzzles in LEGO Skywalker Saga being too easy compared to past games, there's a little bit of selective memory mixed with rose-tinted glasses. Not that the critique isn't 100% valid, but when people pretend the old games were even good in this regard, that's when you have to hold their hand and remind them that they're not 11 anymore and have to pay taxes now. However, that doesn't mean that the ones in the last game weren't at least somewhat worse than the older games. I think the older games' problems with puzzles is that the key was often the same simple shit. Play a smart character to hack thing. Play as stealth character to get past camera and flip switch. Get guy with rope ability to pull thing down. Get big guy to lift thing. It was frankly kind of brain dead, and that's why I stopped playing these games when I was in like 7th grade. They just became so samey and repetitive, which didn't just apply for LEGO Marvel or LEGO Batman or Jurassic World or whatever else, but this applied to every LEGO game, and it got super fatiguing, especially in games where there wasn't as much variety with characters. Skywalker Saga's big issue was simplifying puzzles that were already super simple to begin with. We demoted the shit from first grader puzzles to toddlers putting shaped pegs in matching holes. Legacy is back to being relatively on par with most LEGO games from the past, even if it's still pretty easy. I think my issue is that a lot of puzzles can be solved in the exact same way, just like before, but with different tools. You can thermal scan the floor, hit things with Batarang or Nightwing's Eskrima 6, or Catwoman's Whip. You can use the back claw to pull things down. There's more, but most of the puzzle activities are kind of repetitive. Yet they're so short that it's painless, so it's not terrible. I think the most engaging of the puzzles are the ones where you use Batgirl's version of the remote hacking device. It's not amazing, but it feels like I at least kind of have to use my brain to understand the positioning of the digital lasers I have to avoid. This will probably be hard for anyone in their single digits, but as long as you have a functioning brain, you'll be okay. Speaking of the game being easy, however, the bosses are mostly fine. Now, anyone who's played Arkham City or Origins specifically would know that the Arkham series has had some highlights with boss encounters. Well, I definitely do think that if we talk about all 4 main games, people definitely for sure overhype how good we had it back then. When they were good, they were really good. Whether they were high in spectacle or really creative. Like Ra's al Ghul. I'm not pronouncing it Raish because it sounds fucking stupid. Had all these moments of pure visual awe mixed with being fairly fun. Mr. Freeze having you take him down in multiple different stealthy ways that took advantage of what you knew about not just stealth in general, but your gadgets and the environment. Clayface had a good moveset variety, and the final phase using the fucking sword at the end was pretty awesome. Origins had some cool ones, but the one that stood out to me was Deathstroke, because despite it being kind of a glorified QTE, his fight was tense. It was pretty much a fight that intrinsically wanted you to do it perfectly, even discounting the trophy for it. But you didn't have to do it. Keeping up a streak of counters felt rewarding, and not to mention the fight is just cool as hell. Ignore all the bad fights in Asylum, and also the fact that Knight doesn't have any. Legacy's approach is more or less hitting them until they die, or introducing the idea of using a character-specific tool to stun them. Now, I get why we don't get a Mr. Freeze boss on the level of Arkham City, or a Bane fight on the level of Arkham Origins fights, since this game is designed more simply and family-friendly. Allowing that sort of layer of complexity would just sort of alienate the families that just play this game with their kids. It makes sense why they did it like this, but it's just kind of standard. The bosses sort of blended together for me, even with their different moves because of how easy most of them were. I barely really felt like I was in any danger for most of them for the most part, and frankly, I don't know how to critique these fights since Besides the one time I reviewed Sonic Frontiers when I was 17 years old, I frankly don't really critique games for younger audiences, let alone games as baby easy as LEGO games. There are some bright spots, however. I like the arenas for some of these encounters, especially Poison Ivy and Mr. Freeze's fights. They're just visually pretty nice and set the tone well enough. What else can I say about them, really? They're not that mechanically interesting or challenging. However, there's one fight that does come close. The Talia al Ghul boss in the end is the best boss in the whole game because it feels the least patronizing. Again, kids game, but this is the closest to a mechanically complex fight we get, and it was actually somewhat hard for me. A near 21-year-old man recording a review for a LEGO game alone in a room. What the hell is my life? I shockingly died to this motherfucker 4 times, and I wasn't even that frustrated, and instead super relieved. The past 11 hours at this point felt like I was getting patted on the head for beating small fries or doing the most basic of basic tasks ever. However, this felt like not only was I getting tested, but told to apply everything I had already learned, and quickly. She's the Ishin Ashina of LEGO games, I guess. In its totality, Legacy's bosses are just kinda fine. They're not boring and definitely can be kind of fun, but they're not that memorable to me beyond being kind of fun moments. I think while technically speaking it is a mechanical step above other LEGO games, the bosses are weirdly not as memorable to me. Sure, their mechanics aren't as deep, and maybe it's just my nostalgia, but older LEGO games' best bosses were core memories for me, especially ones like Galactus in LEGO Marvel, or any of the Vader or Maul fights in LEGO Star Wars, hell, even in Skywalker Saga. Maybe they're just bigger visual moments, but Legacy's fights honestly just don't stick with me that much compared to those other games, and lack a certain sauce that I just can't nail down. Not bad, but maybe could be better. Also another game where Deathstroke gets one-tapped and it's set up as like a large encounter. At least this one's aware of its idiocy. It doesn't shit in its hand and eat it by pretending that the Batmobile fight is cooler than an actual hand-to-hand fight. I think in concluding the video, I have to address the many times I've mentioned this game being for children. I mainly mention that because, for one, I know that if this video does well at all, I'll get comments phrased with, "It's a kid's game," but I also think those comments would just be totally wrong. Let me explain what I mean by this exactly. This, along with every other LEGO game ever made, is rated everyone 10 and up, as explained earlier, meaning that, by that hardline definition, the most recommended age to play this by yourself is at 10 years old or older. But that doesn't mean kids under 10 can't play it too. Hilariously, most E10 games are really not that intense. I don't think Kirby Star Allies is exactly going to alienate most children with its pervasive violence. Ooh. I think the only E10 game that actually made sense to be E10 that I've ever played was fucking Shadow the Hedgehog on the PS2. The thing about Legacy that makes me confused by the whole "it's a kid's game" excuse for every one of the game's flaws is that it just makes no sense. Sure, it's rated E10+, but there are so many things to take into account. Batman was created almost 9 decades ago now. There are people who were Batman fans as kids who recently died. I'm sure there are even political leaders who have at least heard of Batman when they were kids or grew up reading Batman comics or at least watched one of the movies. The reason this is important is because this franchise being so old means that in reality, kids aren't really the main target anymore. They're who the game is appropriate for, but if you've actually seen the marketing for this game specifically, you'd understand that they weren't really just trying to rope in kids. Especially since more young kids these days don't really play games or watch movies like this as often. They knew exactly what they were doing. You wouldn't advertise that your combat system for your E10+ licensed LEGO game is inspired by the most influential T-rated superhero franchise ever if you just wanted kids to play the game. Not to mention all the constant references, iconography, and lines ripped from Batman comics, films, games, and television from the very inception of this character and the brand he's a part of. There's no way that that wasn't intentional. While you can definitely present this game to kids and maybe even have fun playing the game with your own kids if you have them, it's not explicitly for them. The way this game was marketed, it was very much for the fans. I mean, kids can't buy this game since they don't have the money, nor do they fully grasp the concept for the most part. Also, with the fact that this is technically the 4th LEGO Batman game, this mostly appeals to millennials and Gen Z adults who played the LEGO Batman games as kids at some point. At the very youngest, I'd say teenagers that also played the LEGO Batman games when they were 4, or like Batman enough to get half the references, probably bought this game too. Most of the people I see defending every shortcoming the game has are adults anyway, so why are you as an adult willing to defend a game just because it's for kids? Wouldn't that make you as childish as the one criticizing it? Now, this isn't to say that some people aren't expecting too much from a LEGO game, like people expecting the story to even be deep. Doesn't change the fact that adults were the ones marketed to. However, I still think that kids deserve the best media on par with stuff for teens and adults, so that they can look back on all this one day and think to themselves, damn, I had good taste when I was 8. I think to a degree, Legacy of the Dark Knight will be this for many kids. I mean, compared to other non-Nintendo children's media, would it really be fair if we didn't let them have this? Holy shit, can you pen it? Stop calling Falcone Falcone, it's getting really fucking annoying.